So I thought I'd share another one of my paranormal experiences. Um, some of them are really interesting, and some of them are like kind of like weird. This one was mildly both. While I was hitchhiking around the country years ago, I found myself in a lot of different places. We would go to these things called rainbow gatherings all the time. They're free. Like every 4th of July, they have a huge like national one. They have international ones. The national one usually was out west, and there was usually like 60,000 people. They would go to a place in the national forest. They would set up these huge, elaborate, handmade ovens made out of mud and tin cans, like a massive eco village. They had giant kitchens that served all these people for free. Like everything was free. There was a giant circle or trading circle. A lot of the local tribes would show up. Just really cool stuff all the time. And so I would go to these things all the time. Whenever they were happening, I would go to these. One year I went to one in Montana. Me and my friend Andy, we just jumped in the car with no money in our pockets and just drove all the way out to Montana. It was a great experience. We got all the way out to Montana, and we had a really wild time at the Rainbow Gathering. There were sweat lodges. There's all kinds of crazy stuff happening. Um, and there was just a moment where I was really blissed out. I was hiking around. I just was meditating that day. A really good vibe was just emanating from myself. I just felt really good, really peaceful, really in touch with everything. And I saw this man in a wheelchair. And he didn't say much to me except for, "Can you get me up that hill there?" And mind you, these hills, we were literally in like the peaks of these mountains. And just hiking your camping gear in was such a challenge. So he wanted me to push his wheelchair with him in it up this like 60-degree steep little foot trail all the way to the top of this base camp, where his friends were. And I was feeling so good and so generous that I decided to take this mission on. And, it took a lot of strength, and I was incredibly winded by the time I got to the top. But I was pushing him all the way to the top. And as I was coming to the top, there was an older woman there with a bell, a Tibetan bell, and she started ringing it, and like everyone came to the edge of this thing, and they all were cheering and clapping, and everyone was like ecstatic about this guy coming to the top. Got him to the top. They all hugged me and said, "Thank you so much. You have no idea what this means to him." Blah 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 blah. I think probably about 3 years later, I was hitchhiking out in California, and I get picked up by this woman, me and a friend of mine. And she told me her name was Madre, which really just means mother in Spanish. Um, so she picked me and my friend up. We were hitchhiking across the country. We were heading out to Arcata, California, Humboldt County, and we were going to go north from there. So we went out there, and as she picked us up, we were like in the somewhere on I think Route 1 or 101. We were hitchhiking north. And she picked us up, and she's like, "I will drive you guys until we run out of gas." We were like, "Okay, whatever." So as we were driving, um, me and her began to talk. I was in the front seat, and we got into this really deep conversation about consciousness, spirituality, and all these other kind of things about reality. And as we were talking, I realized that she has not taken her eyes off of me in probably like 40 minutes. And then I was like, "Wait a minute, whoa." I'm like, you have to watch the road." And she was like, she looked at the road, she looked back to me, she's like, "That's not a problem." And literally looked at me the whole time, just we were just driving. And it was dark out. And at one point we both just looked forward, and it was just empty blackness. And we were just like essentially like flying through blackness in this car. And my friend will validate that this was a literal experience that the three of us had together. And I literally let out like kind of like a shout, like, "Oh my God," like we're just like we're floating through time. And she seemed to understand this and just smiled and was like, "Yeah." And I was like looking at my friend like, "What is happening right now?" And he was freaking out too, and he was like, what's going on, like what is happening, like we're just looking out the windows, there's no stars, there's no roads, there's no nothing, we're just floating through this black space. We were all kind of freaked out, but then we started to laugh and be like, okay, whatever's happening is happening. So we're just floating through the space, having these conversations. There, absolutely nothing anywhere. This car seems to exist by itself in some kind of place free of time and space. And we were driving that night. We were driving probably at like, I think it was probably around 9 or 10 o'clock. And it was easily like another like 6 hours to our destination um, in California where we were going. Was that right? Yeah, about 6 hours if I tracked it right. On foot, it would have took us 6 hours. We arrived at this woman's house, which was a little beyond our destination, within 20 minutes. Um, and like if you do the math, it doesn't translate. It doesn't translate at all. So we were floating through this time and this space. Three of us validated that like this was happening. We weren't all hallucinating. There's no drugs. There's no mind altering substances. Three of us were completely sober, and yet this experience happened. And the kicker is that when we got to this woman's house, she was like, you. She fed us, and she said, "You guys can sleep here on my couches." And I laid down on the couch, and I felt something poke me in the back, and I reached into the couch and I pulled out this Tibetan bell, and I rang it. I was like, huh. And she goes, oh my God, I've been looking for that for like a year. Um, like that's Ram Dass's bell. And I'm like, Ram Dass, the guy who wrote Be Here Now? And she's like, yeah, Ram Dass, you know him? And I'm like, I've read his books. Yeah, I read his books. And she points to a picture and she says, that's me and Ram right after he had his stroke. That's him in his wheelchair at the Montana Rainbow Gathering at the top of the summit. And I just like looked at it and I was like, and I looked at her and I looked at the bell and I looked at the picture again and I'm like, I pushed that guy up that hill to the top of that summit. And she looked at me and she's like, oh my God, it is you. And so, like, here we had, and I'm getting like goosebumps right now. Here we had like this whole experience wrapped all the way around, like years later, that I had no idea who the man in the wheelchair was. I just did this out of kindness. And it turns out that this was Ram Dass right after his a major stroke that he had, which put him in a wheelchair, and he's still in a wheelchair to this day. Um, I'd pushed him to the top of this hill, and she was ringing his bell to welcome him up there. And years later, this ethereal experience happens. This woman picks us up randomly hitchhiking. I laid on her couch and found this bell, which was the same bell she was ringing, which belonged to Ram Dass. And she was a disciple of Ram Dass. So this interesting experience comes all the way around. Um, Again, years later, there's no way it could be a coincidence. The ethereal experience of traveling through time and space, talking about consciousness and time, and talking about all these other spiritual, mathematical things that I understand, she understood, and my friend understood, and full circle picture of Ram Dass with her standing at the top of that summit, the top of the trail, and the bell poking me in the back as I lay down for sleep. I literally, as I went to sleep that night and I was giving thanks as I always do in the evening, I closed my eyes and this image of a silver chalice just being just water pouring into it and overflowing and overflowing and overflowing. This image was just in my mind as I laid there with such a huge smile on my face, and I literally felt like an overflowing cup, because at that moment I really was deeply connected to the universe and to the way that the universe works through synchronization, and through all these experiences, with gratitude, with kindness, with all these things, it procured this one massively amazing experience. A lot of people, they just shrug off a lot of these things. Um, these experiences, people every day just go, oh, that's a weird coincidence, and shrug off. But recognizing them is recognizing the divine in nature, the divine, mathematical things that are playing out all the time around us. So don't shrug off your experiences. Take a good look at them. Don't don't make them fables either, but recognize them, because all these experiences in this life are very, very powerful, and the divine is around us all the time. The beautiful divine, the creation, is working with us and around us all the time. We are connected to it. And all we have to do is pay attention a little bit with more awareness every day, and these things will flower for us and be gems on our life's path. So, hope you like this experience.